All right, well, the federal government is directing its telecommunications regulator to reconsider a decision that would see streaming giants, mostly from the United States, pay triple what they pay now for Canadian content. The CRTC decision was facing significant pushback from U.S. streamers such as Netflix.
Is that another concession to the U.S.?
It is another step to reinforce affordability for Canadians. This is not the time to raise the cost for Canadians.
Now, Prime Minister Mark Carney says the choice wasn't a concession to the United States, but rather a move to prevent Canadian consumers from picking up the tab for increased streaming costs. But not everyone is convinced.
That's quite a way to negotiate when you say, I am weak, you seem to be strong, so let's come and negotiate. The Prime Minister has given concessions after concessions after concessions.
I think the online streaming rules come from an independent arm's length CRTC, and it's inappropriate for Cabinet to intervene. It's actually, I think, potentially illegal.
All right, I'm joined now by the Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture, Marc Miller. Minister, good to see you, sir. Thanks for making the time today.
Nice to see you, David.
How much of the decision to send this back to the CRTC was America, and how much of it was affordability?
Well, I think we shouldn't underplay the impact that these series of decisions that go back to 2024 can have on production costs, on what gets passed through to consumers. David, our numbers showed that this was perhaps a $40 per subscription per person hit, and a number of us have 3 or 4 of those. So something that's not insignificant, but I think most importantly, a realization of what the status quo is. We have a very important law in C11 that was designed to make sure that foreign streamers that are taking a bigger part of the revenue are paying their fair share back into Canadian content, back into productions like Heated Rivalry, like North of North, like Empathie, and getting world-class awards for it. And that's really important. I think the Canadian government has to be there to invest in these people, and we want people to pay their fair share. The reality is a lot of this was stuck up in court decisions, several $100 million frozen, not able to get passed on to these amazing producers that are telling our stories, and that was a problem. So people are talking about coincidence, about the trade discussions. No secret that the USTR had identified this as an irritant, but it had been 2.5 years since we were waiting for this decision, and that timing is indeed coincidental.
But no, I appreciate the CRTC's timing is beyond your control, but this is the sort of thing that was contemplated when C11 was brought in, was it not? I mean, how do you get them to pay more for this content if you don't increase what they have to pay for this content?
Certainly, and we can have a long discussion about the principles behind C11, which we all support, making sure that we're supporting our cultural industries in an ecosystem that is under some stress, particularly with foreign streamers taking a larger part of the revenue. But there's no debate about what the status quo is today. All these funds that were supposedly to be distributed back into local journalism in St. John's, for example, NTV that is struggling, into producers and the shows that I named, and it's just not happening. So we've been backfilling this as the federal government. And today was an important point where we said, yes, we've been impatient to get money into the hands of people, and we need to assume this responsibility and revise the decision. And I understand for listeners and people that are curious and care about this, that there are some elements that remain outstanding. There are some policy directives that we still have to flesh out. But this is a realization today that we're making an important investment, $600 million into the industry, to deal specifically with potential affordability problems.
Right, so $600 million goes in from taxpayers' pockets rather than taking the money from the streamers' pockets. I mean, and in a measure, an increase that was estimated to be bringing in $2 billion with the tripling of what the streamers had to contribute. So it's less than what was expected, and the risk is now being borne by taxpayers instead of the streaming companies.
Right. That $2 billion number is a number I think we should dig into a bit. It would represent the reality if we were to reduce any obligation on all people, including domestic producers. So it's a different number. The numbers related to the increase in the 3 decisions really amount to several $100 million. This was actually probably slightly more, but it's a realization that we do have to do more as a government and make sure that this industry, in the tested times that they are facing, actually thrives with the support from the federal government, by investing in the Canadian Media Fund, by investing in CPAC that does some amazing coverage that other outlets don't do. And I think that's important. I think Canadians want and need to see it.
Right, but here it is. And look, and I know I'm saying this from the perch of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is heavily funded by the taxpayers of Canada. So I appreciate the irony of where this conversation is coming from.
You're doing your job, and I think that's important.
But this was supposed to be to make the disruptors and the benefactors in the form of the streamers who have disrupted the market, not by any nefarious means, just by coming in with a product, this creative disruption thing, pay a more equal share. And now that is not going to happen based on this decision and sending it back to the CRTC. And instead, the taxpayers are paying more. So what if the CRTC comes back and says, we still think they should pay 15% of the revenue instead of 5%? Like, where does this land as a solution?
Yeah, I think that requires us, David, to speculate about what the direction that we will give its content. I have some strict parameters that I have to observe as the minister, but it is a statement that they will indeed have to pay less. It won't be a statement that they don't have to pay into Canadian content, into issues such as discoverability, which is so important in my home province of Quebec, and anyone that cares about francophone broadcasting. So another elements that are matters of principle, but really the reality that that this isn't getting done as quickly as it has, and the reality that even in the face of this judgment, you would have seen this thing tied up in the courts for indeed several years.
So where do you think this leaves the overall industry? I mean, this is $600 million. I'm assuming if this is going to, it took 2.5 years to get this decision. Now you have to give them new parameters. So there's going to be a similar period of assessment potentially. This is $600 million a year annually. The government is now going to contribute to this, or is this a one-time infusion of cash this year?
This is a sector, David, that is struggling. It has been struggling for some years, notwithstanding the trade challenges with our most important trading partner. There is a need to reform and to get into a more digital era, and that has caused some shocks and some disruption that you properly identified. But there's also a heck of a lot of potential for this sector. You've seen that with some of our shows that are getting unpredictable and incredible coverage around the world. And we need to keep investing in this to make sure that we're actually realizing a potential that we think we can do as a country. We've seen countries like South Korea that we just signed an audiovisual treaty with, knock it out of the park in terms of their audiovisual investments. I think we need to start thinking less negatively and more positively as to what this and what we can accomplish together if we target our investments properly. And that's not something that this investment will solve entirely, but it is part of the ongoing discussion as we reform institutions that have been underserving Canadians and should be serving them better.
Well, another key part of this recent CRTC rewrite of the contribution regulations, it wasn't just the increase on the streamers, it was a decrease in the obligations on the traditional broadcasters, ease the burden on Bell and other companies like that. Do those changes now go away because this has been sent back to the CRTC, or can you carve up the bits of this decision that you do want to live with?
Look, there's a lot of carving that needs indeed to be done, but I would expect those reductions to be maintained. This is a sector domestically, and this is part of the argument that we have been going back and forth on, has been arguing rightly that they are the ones bearing a large aspect of the contribution into Canadian content, noting that their ad revenue has been dropping precisely because these streamers have come in and taken a bigger portion of the market. So that's the reality that C11 was trying to address. I still think it could be used to that end, but not according to CRTC decisions that we disagree in part with. And I would say that the law that we passed was never intended to have the CRTC make the ultimate decision, but there is a process that we need to respect, and a lot of people that put a lot of work into it over the period of time that they've been assessing these. So
you think those reductions will be maintained, but do they go into effect now, or do they have to wait until this extended review process is complete?
I know there's a lot of questions that people would want an immediate answer to. I'm focused on getting those investments out, and I do appreciate that there's a lot of unanswered questions, and I'll do my best to answer them over the next little while.
Okay, but on the bigger meta question here, Minister, the digital service tax, the big digital giants didn't like that. It became a trade irritant. It went away. This changed. The digital giants didn't like it. It became a trade irritant. It went away. We're going to get an AI strategy from the government tomorrow. How credibly can any middle power regulate the big U.S. tech companies and influence and even impose taxes on the big U.S. tech companies when it becomes a trade irritant? They have a direct line to the White House. The leaders of the algorithm sat in the front row of the inauguration. It seems like this whole space is almost impossible for non-American countries to regulate and tax at an appropriate level that they want.
Well, I'd say watch and see. David, Canada is well positioned with as one of the top 4 countries that is leading in AI. There are lots of optimism, lots of understandable mistrust. AI adoption has to be done with our eyes wide open. And obviously there's an announcement coming, and I would direct your attention to it. But we have to demonstrate to Canadians that AI has a place in responsible use. And whether we like it or not, it's coming. So there is that realization, and I don't want to change the frame that you're presenting it in, because it is fueling a lot of the distrust and fear, but there's a lot of ability to use it and leverage it, whether it's in the cultural industries that I have some responsibility in supporting, or in other areas that we need to have Canada leading in the world, and indeed with the partner that we have to the south of us.
But just trying to get these companies to do what countries want. Whether it's contributing to news, whether it's contributing to culture, whether it's just paying tax on revenue, it seems to be a near impossible task, because they will litigate, fight, resist, and lobby in the United States to put pressure on countries that try to do it. I mean, how do you get around that?
Well, I think in any technological transformation or disruption, you see the legal process sometimes dragging behind, but also at the forefront in some cases when you see large litigation, large class actions in the US saying that these companies need to be more responsible. The laws have some difficulty in catching up. That's what I'm trying to focus on in introducing potentially the legislation on safe social media. That will be important as an overall part of the AI strategy that has to have strict criminal consequences in other laws for violations that AI companies are now doing in some respects, and with devastating consequences when they don't follow the law, as well as making sure that people's privacy is respected. It's a delicate dance, but I think Canada has the tools and certainly the expertise to deal with it.
Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture, Marc Miller, we appreciate the time, sir. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.